Most missing persons cases that I cover are usually cases in which a person just vanishes off the face of the earth, never to be seen again. The case I bring to you today is not that kind of case. This is a case that could have been prevented 100 times over by so many different people. A case that needs to be heard, as much as it may hurt to hear. It will frustrate you. It will anger you. No justice is served. But hopefully we, as a whole, as people, can learn from the disappearance of Susan Powell. Welcome to another intriguing episode of All Things Mysterious, the podcast where all the realms of true crime, supernatural, and the unexplained converge. I'm your host, Jordan.
I'm Matt.
We're ready to plunge into today's fascinating mysteries. Let's dive right in. Before we truly dig into the case and the disappearance, background is needed to understand the type of people we're learning about. Susan was born on October 16, 1981, and was raised religious, being born and raised in the Mormon community. She was said to be an extremely kind and giving person, growing up to eventually get her cosmetology license. She met her husband, Josh Powell, in November of 2000. Josh did not have the same childhood that Susan did. While Josh did somewhat grow up in the Mormon church, his parents divorced due to his father sharing pornography with his sons and basically refusing to parent them. He had attempted suicide at least once and threatened his mother with a butcher knife. So clearly, Josh was the picture of mental health growing up. Regardless of this, Susan seemed to fall for him, and they were married in 2001 and lived with Stephen Powell, Susan's father-in-law, and Josh's dad. This is important because Stephen developed an obsession with Susan to the point that he tried to kiss her. Obviously, at this point, they decided it was best they move away.
Yeah, that's odd.
There are so many things about this case before we even get to the actual crimes that are committed that are just like red flag, red flag, red flag, red flag, red flag. Just all over the map.
Yeah, and I will be honest, I've never even heard of this case before.
That surprises me because this is a really big case.
Yep, never heard of it.
I feel like maybe once we get to some more details, you might recognize some more of it.
Maybe, I don't know. I'm not big into missing persons anyways.
This is a little more than a missing persons case.
Oh, we'll see. Sorry, it is super hot in here today, so it's hard to think.
It's actually warm enough in here that I'm not even cold, which is saying something. So, that's fair.
I'm interested to learn. We'll see if you actually make me angry.
I will.
I don't know about that. There's no children involved, so I don't think it'll upset me. I'm not looking forward to this now.
So they moved to a suburb of Salt Lake City, and Susan got a job at Wells Fargo. Josh was working in web design. They had two sons, Charles and Braden, born in 2005 and 2007, respectively. From the outside looking in, everything looked perfect. But inside the home, all was not well. Josh was very controlling towards Susan and possibly the boys as well. He refused to go to church with them and eventually racked up enough debt, over $200,000, to put them in bankruptcy in 2007. In a super creepy video in 2008, Susan can be seen taking a recording of all of their belongings, saying, and I quote, "if something happens to her." While the video itself isn't necessarily troubling, what we now know makes us give it a little bit more thought.
Yep, now I know exactly what you're talking about.
I knew you would know the case. It's a big one.
Yeah, because I think in fact, I'm pretty sure I know where you got this case from. Because I was talking to Eric about this case. Said this is one that I wanted to do.
Really? Because I don't know. I had this case in the back of my head for a long time.
Yeah, it was, a couple weeks ago I was talking to him, and this is one of the cases I brought up because I actually just saw another YouTube video about it. It was obviously more focused on the kids part of it, but
I do go into a little bit of focus on that.
yeah, I mean you have to because it's all connected. But although now I'm confused because I don't understand why the father-in-law is important now.
Oh, there's more.
Yeah, because I don't. That's
It's
I know the case pretty well, at least from later on. Didn't know that was her name though. I don't know how I missed that. But yeah, so I definitely remember this, and part of it is definitely gonna piss me off.
it's honestly such a heartbreaking case. Just all of it overall, every part of it.
Well, I'll get into it later because I don't want to spoil anything, but I've definitely got opinions on this one, at least for part of it. So we'll wait till that comes up.
On Sunday, December 6th, 2009, Susan took the boys to church, then they went home as usual. A neighbor stopped by their home that afternoon and left around 5 p.m. As far as we know, that was the last time Susan was seen alive. The next morning, when Josh didn't show up for work, and neither did Susan, nor did the kids show up at daycare, the daycare called both Josh and Susan to make sure everything was okay. Failing to get in touch with them, they reached out to their emergency contact, Josh's sister, Jennifer. Jennifer then went out to their home and, worried about carbon monoxide poisoning, she called the police. Police agreed about the risk, broke inside, and found no one home. But what they did find was a massive wet spot on the carpet with 2 box fans on and pointing directly at the wet spot. Susan's wallet and purse were inside the home. Around 5 p.m. that day, Josh came home with both kids in tow, saying he brought them on a last-minute camping trip in December, in the snow. Not the least bit sketchy. When asked about why he didn't call off of work, he said he thought it was Sunday.
Okay, so I will play devil's advocate here. As you know, I'm very much ADHD. Very much randomly will just decide to do something. So the fact that he took, supposedly, which obviously I don't believe him, but, taking a last minute camping trip doesn't really seem suspicious to me. And I don't know if you talk about it or not. I know when the police were trying to talk to the kids.
I do talk about that.
Okay. Then I'll talk about that later. But, I mean, on the face of it, to me, it's not super suspicious. Just because I'm kind of the same way. I'm like very impulsive. That's the word I was trying to think of. Very much impulsive. But anyways.
My thing is, these kids were like somewhere around 5 and 7 years old. Somewhere in those age ranges.
Weren't they? I thought they were younger.
They might have been younger. I'm going to be honest with you. I forgot to look at their ages. I was doing mathematics, and nobody ever should let me do that. Ever. It's a bad idea. Anywho.
Don't worry. I'll do your research for you.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I was too busy setting dates in my head and worrying about making sure names were correct, dates were correct, etc. Anywho, why would you take your young children camping in December in the snow? In the snow. Like, that's not prime camping time, I feel like.
A lot of people do camp in winter because, I mean, there's a whole market for winter camping. Obviously, I don't believe a lot of this, but okay. 2 sons. So this was in 2009, right?
Yes.
So they were 4 and 2.
Yeah, I was really off on the ages.
I knew they were younger because I knew the police did get some information from them, but they couldn't verify if it was accurate or if it was something they kind of just conjured in their head. Because I know that they also got other information that they knew couldn't be accurate.
Yes.
Uh,
And we do go over that
all right.
in later
Yeah.
sections here. Actually, I think it's my next section. But it just blows my mind. Like, don't get me wrong, I do understand the part where he says I thought it was Sunday because don't get me wrong, like we've all had that day where we're like, what? It's Monday? Like, oh. But
Yeah, I was going to say, I know for a fact you've done that yourself.
oh my God, I've done that so many days. I've done that so many days myself. I've gotten my days so mixed up, and I think we all have. But my issue with it is that we know for a fact that Susan took both the boys to church that morning, and they do that on Sundays. And it just, I don't know, just it doesn't piece itself together. It just, all of it together, individually, it's really sketchy. You know, I don't know. I really don't like it. And then the more that you look into it, the more we go into this, I think you'll all see what I'm talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I 100% believe that he was involved in her disappearance. What I'm saying is, I just don't believe that this on its own is enough, enough evidence to say that.
No, I agree entirely. This on its own is not enough.
Because I think about that all the time. Like, if, some of the stuff that I do is weird and kind of suspicious, especially if I ever get questioned.
Oh God, if they just looked at my search history. Oh.
Yeah. The fact that they went camping in winter and it's kind of a last minute thing is not suspicious to me inherently. Just because, I've done something similar before. I'm very impulsive. And obviously, I really like camping, so.
I'm not a camping kind of person, so I'm going to just take your word for it.
But, anyways, we'll get into more here in a minute, I think. Because I don't want to spoil too much.
Agreed. On to the next. Police investigators had a lot on their hands to figure out. They took samples of the carpet for testing and interviewed the kids. On December 10th, detectives checked out the area where Josh said he was camping with the kids, and there was no sign of them actually being there. During one of a few interviews, their son Charlie tells police his mommy is dead. Brayden, their other son, drew a picture with his dad, his brother, and himself, but not his mom. There was also a car in the picture. When asked where his mom was, he said she was in the trunk. During this time, search efforts were held around the campsite area and around, but no body was found. After a warrant was in place to search the Powell home, more came out about the tumultuous relationship. There was also a warrant for the home of Susan Powell because they had lived with him for a while. In Stephen's possession, they found hundreds of photos of not only Susan, but other women in various stages of undress taken without their knowledge. And in the files of Josh's computer, they found simulated child pornography, basically cartoon images, bestiality, and incest pornography. At this point, thankfully, the children were no longer in his custody, and they were in the custody of Susan's parents. However, he was permitted in-home visitation rights.
I know what's coming up here soon, so I'll wait to comment on that.
Please don't spoil it. Thank you.
I'll try not to.
So the reason that I made sure to mention Stephen and his obsession with her is that it is thought that it's possible he had something to do with her death as well. We don't know for sure, obviously, but it's definitely a possibility with his really creepy obsession with her.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's trying to take responsibility off of him and put it on his dad. Because I'll say right now, I 100% believe that he murdered his wife.
No, I agree with you entirely. I do too. But I do appreciate that the police didn't just hone in specifically on one person like they tend to do.
Yeah, but I mean, in this case, like, I feel like they didn't go hard enough. And I really hate to say that because,
What comes next?
yeah,
Yeah, no, I agree.
I am not a fan of DFS having like unlimited power like they have, basically. I think they abuse it quite often. But in situations like this, I don't think they use enough of their powers. And it's really weird because, like, I don't really know how to explain it, but in this case, they definitely did not do enough. And it's struggling because,
You don't want them to have the ultimate say, but at the same time, you have to have trust in them to do the right thing. And there's this delicate balance. And in this case, the balance was not right.
I know people are going to say, that I'm just criticizing the police because, we just had an episode recently where I said they focus too much on the husband. But I think, like everything else, there's a balance. And I think, that case, they were focusing too much on the husband. I feel like in this one, they weren't focusing enough. Because, I mean, there's all this evidence, circumstantial, obviously. And obviously, the kids, you can't really take their account into it because, 4 and 2. There's definitely a lot that I think went unnoticed in this case. A lot that they should have done better. And I'll talk about it more here in a minute. But strictly talk about the mom's case alone. The fact that he was able to basically leave town and move, because I know that he did move back to where his parents, in the same town that his parents lived. And that's actually when the kids got taken, if I remember correctly.
Yes, right about. He wasn't able to afford the home that he was living in
Yeah.
without Susan's income as well.
I don't know. I just feel like they didn't do enough in this case.
On Sunday, February 5th, 2010, a visit was scheduled. The social worker brought the children to Josh's home, and they ran to the front door. But when she tried to come inside with them, Josh slammed the front door in her face. Immediately, she called 911. Unfortunately, the 911 call did not go well. The dispatcher didn't understand the urgency of the matter. One of the children was screaming inside, and the social worker was sure this was a life or death situation, but the dispatcher didn't understand. While waiting for police to come, the house exploded, killing both Josh and the 2 boys. It was discovered that he tried killing them first with a hatchet. While the house was burning, the social worker called 911 a second time frantically, but there was nothing that could be done to save them.
Okay, so this is going to be a rare one for me because there's been a lot of these cases over the years about 911 dispatch. And I think we talked about this in an episode before. Yeah, it was about Kendrick.
Was it Kendrick?
Yeah, well, we talked about I think we did at least. Anyways, there's a boy who got pinned in the back of his minivan when the seats fell back on him, and he'd called 911. And they didn't take it seriously. They thought it was a prank, and the kid ended up dying because they didn't do their job. I feel like this is the same exact situation. I get that they've got to use their gut, their discretion, and they've got to be able to determine if things are an emergency or not. But in my opinion, they need to treat every call like it's an emergency.
And to my knowledge, they are trained like that, And so I've heard the 911 call so many times, and it gives me chills every single time because you can hear the panic in the social worker's voice, and she's trying to describe that this is a life or death situation, and you need to get somebody there right now because we don't know what he's going to do behind those doors. And they're like, ma'am, we're going to get somebody out there, but we have to, I think he says something like, we have to prioritize other calls. And it's like, excuse me, like, these are children?
Yeah. But now, on the other hand, this is where DFS failed miserably. Because I definitely believe that they knew that they were at risk to begin with. The fact that she instantly, as soon as he locked the door on her, knew that they were in danger. So why wasn't there extra precautions being taken? Why were they put in this position where he could even do that?
No, and I go over this a little bit later too, because they should not have been in this situation to begin with.
No.
He was clearly a volatile person, and even just before he had the kids, he was not well, obviously.
Yeah.
And it just seemed to have gotten worse over the years.
But I definitely think that, 911 dispatcher failed on this one. The DFS workers definitely failed on this one. Yeah, I'm not going to say the cops necessarily failed on this one. I think they could have done more, but I don't think they failed in per se. But ultimately, you know, two young boys lost their life because the system that was supposed to protect them didn't.
And most likely Susan.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean,
But it's also the kids.
yeah.
I mean, there are so many ways this case just went, just so many ways that it could have been prevented, and it wasn't. And it just hurts me deep into my soul.
The way I look at it, the kids were 100% preventable. We could have prevented that. Not we, but the system could have prevented that. Susan, I mean, obviously she's a victim. She was in an abusive relationship. And that's why if you're in an abusive relationship, you can't stay, because this is exactly how it ends up.
Regardless of how difficult it is, reach out to somebody. I don't care if it's someone that you've never spoken to at work. There's a good chance whoever it is, they're going to try and help you regardless. Okay? If I've never spoken to you, I don't care. I'm going to try and help.
I'm trying to think of the proper way to, because obviously the kids were preventable. They should have been prevented. And in hindsight, I believe, with Susan, you could tell that that's the route it was going. But I don't think that could have been as easily prevented, if that makes sense.
No, I feel like it was more difficult to prevent.
Yeah, I mean,
I still feel like it probably was preventable, but more difficult.
because honestly, I mean, at that point, they weren't really on the radar of the police. It feels a little bit different to me, I guess, because these kids at the time were in the custody of the state. That feels like it's worse in a way, just because they were in the custody of the state.
I agree.
It's a horrible case, and it definitely should have been prevented. But anyways, moving on.
After going through her belongings, investigators found a handwritten will from Susan. It's long, and I'm not going to read all of it, but at the end it reads, "If I die, it may not be an accident, even if it looks like one." She wrote that her marriage had extreme turmoil, and she wanted it documented somewhere her husband couldn't get to. In the end, she suffered the fate she was most afraid of. The carpet fiber tested positive for both Susan's DNA and DNA of an unknown male. Stephen, Josh's father, was arrested and charged with voyeurism and spent 6 years in prison. He passed away in 2018. Josh changed his life insurance policy to go to his brother Michael, and in 2013, Michael took his own life by jumping off a bridge. Police have looked into every possible lead into where Josh, Stephen, or even Michael may have hidden her body, but she has never been found. Susan's parents fought to have her legally declared dead. They also sought a lawsuit against the Department of Social and Health Services, citing wrongful death in the case of their grandsons. While the social workers had immunity, they did end up winning the case and were granted $98 million. They also fought for a law that prohibits family members from seeing their children if they're on trial for murder, which, in my opinion, should probably have already been a law. No one, not a soul alive, knows where Susan's body may be. Many people believe she's in a mine shaft, or possibly just buried somewhere out in the wilderness. Cadaver dogs have been used to find traces of where she may be. but her family still has no answers.
Don't have much to say on this except for definitely not enough. They should have got way more.
I do agree with the fact that the individual caseworker shouldn't have been held liable, because I work with people who work in that industry, and they have pretty much no say in how all of it works. It's more or less like a court system individually, and that's all on their higher ups. So they pretty much are held to the other people's standards. So I don't think they individually had anything to do with it.
And I'm probably going to piss a lot of people off, but I think that they should be held liable. Because if anybody knows that the system's broken, they do. And if they just do nothing and just go along with it, nothing's ever going to get fixed. Ultimately, it boils down to is they have more power. They are granted more power than most people. In some cases, they have more power than police officers.
Maybe, but their power is still so limited. In a way, they're still limited by what they can and can't do by law.
So DFS in pretty much every state can pull kids from parents' custody without court order, without anything. And they've got the power to take kids without, any kind of oversight.
But that's not on the individual. It might be the caseworker who documents it, but that's not on them to actually decide.
But they ultimately are the ones who get to decide if they pull the kids for emergency. It's all within the system, and the system itself is broken. Let's just acknowledge the fact that DFS is for poor people. Ultimately, if you're rich, you never deal with DFS, period.
Not really, no.
They can literally destroy families and not even think twice about it. But then on the other end of the spectrum, I'm not saying, that they don't need some of those powers. I think they just don't use them where they need them.
I agree. And I think the people that go into it don't go with bad intentions. I think they go with really good intentions.
Yeah.
I don't know if they stay with those intentions, but I think they aren't handed all the things that they necessarily need, all the tools they need to do the proper job.
Yeah. I think in this case, in this specific case, based on the fact that she knew that the kids were in danger instantly, she definitely should be held liable, because she put those kids in a situation where, and like you said, if she had made reports or whatever that these kids were in danger and it was ignored, then yeah, it should be on her superiors. But as far as I know, as far as I've read before, there was no reports ever made that she felt these kids were in actual danger when they were around him.
I don't think that there were.
Yeah.
And up until this point, he hadn't shown any signs of being a danger to the kids.
But
explicitly
okay.
Anyway.
Yeah, and I get that, but my thing is from the time that he locked the kids in the house to the time that she made the 911 call were seconds. You do not, as a person, you do not come to a judgment that quickly without having, a suspicion that he's dangerous. Because like I said, just because the kids were in supervised visitation does not necessarily mean that the parent was dangerous to the kids.
Well, no, but she also knew the background of, he'd just gotten his kids taken away and she could smell gasoline. That didn't help.
Yeah.
That would also make me nervous. Prior to that, everything had been fine. Prior to that, she'd come over, kids would run to the front door, she'd go in, everything was fine. This time, kids run to the front door slams, she smells gasoline. That would also be an immediate red flag for me.
Maybe, but it would still take you a good minute or so to kind of process that. And then, obviously most people are going to kind of think, should I call, or maybe I'm just overreacting. There's always that self-doubt that you're going to have. Unless there was something that she saw or,
Maybe she just had that feeling. Maybe there was that sixth sense.
But I mean, that's got to come from somewhere, is what I'm saying. There had to have been something that she felt in the past that would tell her that she was dangerous.
I mean, it could be. I don't know. I wasn't in her position. And she also, I'm sure, was more or less ordered to do this.
I guess I'm overthinking it. Maybe I just feel like there was something that she felt or saw or, that instantly made her believe that he was a danger and he was going to kill him.
Not only could Susan's death have been prevented if she was brave enough to leave, but if laws were put in place, her son's death could also have been prevented as well. A family may never get closure because of one man's issues with domestic violence and control. May Susan eventually be found, and may her soul rest in peace. Thank you for joining us on this journey through all things mysterious. Your engagement is what makes this so rewarding. If you've enjoyed uncovering these mysteries with us, please show your support by liking, subscribing, and following us on your favorite listening platform. For more intriguing content and ways to stay connected, don't forget to check us out on our links in the description below. Your involvement is the key to unlocking more thrilling mysteries.
As always, we keep you guessing.